Okay, now I've got this piece here that goes to the amplifier, and I've got my main power line coming in from the outside of the case. What I need to do is I need to connect these two together, as well as another second piece of wire to run to the Scubaboo board. And I'm going to cut that out right now, probably about like that. I'll nip off a short section here. Like that. And we'll make sure both ends are bared. Okay, now it's time. I've got my other little piece. This is the part that's going to be going to the Scubaboo board itself. What I want to do is I want to match colors. The wires are red and black, so I'm going to bundle all the reds together. Give them a twist so they stay together. And I'm going to do the same thing with the black. And if the leads are a little bit too small, you can always take off a little bit more housing and marry them together. Now, I want to make sure this does not come apart, because they can pull apart, you know, especially when you're trying to mount them into the board and whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder them together. So get some solder out. Get my soldering iron. And I am just going and you just want to cover the connections with a bit of solder. That will keep them from unraveling. Okay, now I want to check both sides of the connection, make sure the solder made it all around. It did. What I ended up with is that there. Both of them have some solder on it. I've got my line here going to the power tap out here on the side of the case. This part here goes to the amplifier, and this part will hook into the Scubaboo board. That way everything's powered. Now I cannot put them in the case like that. I gotta have some sort of case covering on it. Normally I just use electrical tape, but it has a habit of wearing out and coming off. So I am going to try some liquid electrical tape. I've never used this stuff before. This is the first time. I've heard Hallstaff and Scuba and Bobby Atkins talk about this stuff many a time. And I'll give it a shot. I got a couple other projects I'm going to be doing where this is going to come in awfully handy. I'm just giving it a good, healthy, general coating, making sure all surfaces are covered. I do like that. That's a lot quicker than trying to wrap it with electrical tape. I am being impatient. I should wait for this stuff to dry. And I'm not doing that. As you can tell, I'm being impatient. I want to get this done. Okay, I'm going to consult the one I already have done. I'm going to need a small screwdriver for this to make the connection. Negative wires are connected. Now time to do the positive wire. Okay, that got connected. Okay, so I got my power tap here, and I've just made my connection here on the Scubaboo board, and that leaves this part here, which slides into that socket there. Once that's done, you can safely tuck these wires down and out of the way. So we got the power hooked up to both the amplifier and the Scubaboo board. So we should be good to go that way. Now we need to start making all our connections with everything else. Fun, fun, fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out 3, 4. And we'll set this off to the side. We're done with that. We'll let things, especially the liquid electrical tape, dry. Okay, now I've got 4 of these push buttons. I need to cut some wire to attach to each of the pins and solder all the pins. And that's going to take a little bit. But we'll cut all the wiring to the same length. It doesn't matter if it's red or black or blue or what have you. Not on these. I'll cut off right now 12 of these. Alright, another segment for you. Now I have 4 boards to put in the boxes, so I went ahead and I pre-did all the 4 buttons that go on the side of the box for the relays, as well as the end for the amplifier. Sorry, brain freeze there. Now I did all of them but one because I wanted to show you the process. Now I went and cut my leads to length, and what I ended up doing, see if I can get this so it shows, is I measured from the, like on the amplifier here, I measured from the furthest hole to the furthest screw over here, and then cut all my wires the same length. And then I did the same thing for the relays, the switches. Now the switches I did in red wiring, and the amplifier I'm doing in black. Now on the switches, if you look on the back, there's a metal tab sticking out. And I don't know if you can see it, but in the middle of each tab there's a hole. It's real simple. All I'm doing is just inserting the wire through the hole and then bending it over and pinching it down to start with. You do that to all 4 of them, all 4 switches, all 4 metal tabs. And I position the switch and the wires so the wires are coming straight off that metal tab. And then it's just a simple matter to secure them into place. Take some solder and your soldering iron and put a drop of solder over the wire connection where it meets the tab. I like to get the wire totally covered. I want to ensure a good connection. And you just do that to all 4 tabs. And I do need a new soldering iron. It goes a lot quicker with a new soldering iron. And your joints look a lot cleaner too. This one's seen a lot of use. It's ready for replacement. got that side done. Now I'm going to flip it over. I want to make sure the solder's gone all the way through that hole on the wire. And it hasn't. And that's basically because my soldering iron, like I said, needs to be replaced. It's getting wore out. So it's not providing the right heat coverage. Okay, there we go. There we got nice coverage. Give it a second here to set up. Now once I get to that stage, you notice the wires are sticking straight out. They're not loose. When I went and peeled back the housing on the wire, I left the wire a little too long to go into the fittings on the board and the amplifier. So I'm going to come back through and just snip them down a little short. A little shorter. I don't want a whole lot of wiring sticking out once I make my connections to the board and the amplifier. Okay. When you get to this stage and it's all soldered up, you're ready to start mounting them on the boards. And to do that, we'll get a series of 4 connectors out here. You simply have to insert the wires in order through the holes in the container. Come on, get in there. There you go. Okay, once they're inside the container, the wires that is, take some hot glue and run it a bead around both sides and on the ends of your fitting. And then insert it where it belongs before the hot glue sets up. And then hold it into place until the hot glue dries. And I've got one set of switches on. Now, it's just a matter of repeating the process for all 4 sets of switches. Then I always like to go back through and hit each of the buttons to make sure they're working okay. If you put too much hot glue on the back of these switches, they'll get into the buttons here and seal the buttons from moving, in which case the buttons are no good. Now I've got those 3 mounted. I just got to repeat the process over here for the amplifier. This one is going to be for the speakers. Okay, there we go. I'm going to fold these wires up and out of the way. Okay, now this next step you are not going to be able to see because the camera's at the wrong angle. Now, here I'll kind of show you here. If you look, let's see, where do I got? There we go. If you look down here, there's a blue bar with 3 screws on it. Each switch has one. Okay, we've got 3 bars on the outside. This bottom bar is going to attach to the far right screw on each one of those terminals. The middle row of switches will hit the middle screw on all 4 relays, and the top one will be the far left. And I'm going to go through here and make my connection. Now as I make a connection with each wire, I'll be tucking the wire down and out of reach, down and under the board, so it is out of the way. You want to put the wires in order. In other words, the right hand switch here goes to the right hand relay. The next one goes to the next one, and so on, all the way down the line. Now another thing I'm doing too is after I get done tightening the screw down, I give the wire a slight tug to make sure it's not going to pop loose. You want to make sure it's in the socket and firmly attached. You don't want to reef down on the screw because you can strip it and break something. But you do want to make sure it's making connection. I got the wires for the bottom switch done. Get those out of the way. And if you notice, the wires are all kind of hooped up there. What I want to do is take those wires and try to very carefully tuck them underneath the board so they're not sticking up like that. It also gets them out of the way for making the connections with the other wires. I got the first switch wired, and as you can see here, all the wires are tucked underneath the board. Now I just need to sit there and redo the same thing. I'll be working on the middle switch, attaching it to the middle screw on all the terminals. And I'll just repeat that process until all the wires are attached. Well, before we go on to the next step on this, I want to put a correction in. I did make one mistake on here, and that was when I was installing the Scubaboo board itself. The screws, there's 4 1-inch long screws on each corner to hold that down. When I did the first one, which you saw a little bit ago, the first segment, I put the screws in backwards. In other words, I had the heads of the screws on the bottom of the container and the bolts up top. You need to make sure the heads are on the board and the nuts are on the bottom. For the main reason, I didn't catch it until I went to start putting these wires in here. The nuts were actually interfering with this connection here, and it was giving me a hard time. It was making it hard to insert the wire into the clip where it needed to be, and I had a problem there and over here on the power side too. So I ended up having to take the board loose, flip the screws, and put it back in. So make sure you put the screws in head first through the board first and then out the bottom. Now we've got our connections made for all the relay switches here, and they're all wired into their proper receptacles. And the way this works is these 3 here control the first relay, the second set controls the next, and so on down the board. So this one here will control the last relay on the container. And it looks like I have tipping it back and forth. I just found a mistake. I didn't have it in its socket all the way, or it wasn't tightened down enough. So we'll get that fixed right here, right now, before we go any further. Now another thing I do too, and I haven't done it on this one yet, is I label the different bars. Top one is where your power goes into. So for each switch, this top bar, you have to have a power line going into it or your prop won't activate. The next one is NO. That's what's marked on the board. And the bottom one, NC. The O stands for open. In other words, whatever you have plugged into that bar, the middle bar, when the board is not activated, that item, like if it's a light, will be on. And this bottom one here, if you have anything plugged in that, it will be off. And then when the board activates, the middle bar turns off and this one turns on, if that makes any sense. And I'll show you an example of that when we go to test the board. But anyway, got that problem fixed. Yeah, it feels like everything else is connected okay. The next thing to do are these black wires here. They hook up to the 4 switches for the speakers, and they hook up to the amplifier here. In order to make your connection on the amplifier, you're going to have to de-hook the power and fold it back so it's out of the way. And sometimes that wire just does not want to stay where you put it. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to start with the wire coming off of this switch, and it's going to go to the furthest point on the amplifier and be attached there, and I'll just work my way down the switches, connecting them up to the different connectors on the amplifier. And once they're connected, it'll look like that. You just need to tuck them down so they're below the board, and then you can rehook your power up. And it should look like that by the time you get everything wired up. You have your relay switches here, which have all been tucked in underneath the board. You got your wires to go to your the speaker terminals on the amplifier, and your power's plugged in there. I got a power connection here on the board, and where your adapter plugs in on the outside. So it's all, that part's all wired. Now, when you reach that stage, you can take one of these. And it's a male-to-male connector. One end, there's a little square box right here next to the capacitor, plugs in there. The other end plugs in on the amplifier right by where the power outlet does, or is. And what this wire is for is to transfer your sound from the MP3 player to your amplifier. Now, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the amplifier and the reason for putting that in. The MP3 player that goes on the board has decent sound. The one thing I did not like about it is, in order to set the sound level, and there's 0 through 10, 0 being off, 10 being the max, you have to use the programming buttons in order to do it. And it gets a little confusing. So I leave the MP3 player alone on the board, and I just leave it set to the way Scuba has it set when he builds them. And I use the volume knob on the amplifier to control my sound. I can turn it all the way up to max, or I can turn the sound all the way off. So, you know, I use the amplifier to control the sound. Now, with the way Scuba has the MP3 player programmed on the Scubaboo board and the amplifier, you can make some windows rattle with this little 10-watt amplifier. It really puts out the noise. But anyway, you put that little pigtail in. And at this point, about the only thing we have left to do with this is getting the sensor wired up, which will be our next stage.